Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Martin. I'm here from Inquire Ed, and welcome to today's special teacher appreciation webinar, The Power of Stories in the Classroom. We have stories to tell, amazing guests to talk with, and thanks for tuning in. Julie, it's so great to have you here today. You have quite a resume, award-winning radio producer, TED speaker, best-selling author. You spent your life working in conversations with highly creative people, interviewing them, probing them, guiding, and creating events and live public radio programs about them and their work. I know you have a book out that's called Spark, How Creativity Works, and that you map out the coordinates and dimensions of creativity. I'm so glad that you can bring that creative energy here with us today.
Thank you so much. And it's so exciting to be here knowing that my latest creative venture, which I've done with the Onassis Foundation and with a wonderful performing organization called The Team, and the two artists we're going to introduce today. It's called Live from Mount Olympus, and it's a podcast that brings to life Greek myths for kids. We think from like age 10 to 12, but we've heard that grown-ups love it too. The kids grown-ups love it too. And I have to tell you, Martin, after basically a lifetime working in radio, it's been so wonderful to create something, and working in public radio, to create something fictional with these extraordinary collaborators and performers. I'm
Oh,
just
that's so
so
great. And we're so glad to have you on and get to hear some of that. And one of the things that I want to talk to you a little bit about are just stories in general, because we're here to celebrate classroom stories, those we experience, like Live from Mount Olympus in the classroom, that are shared by teachers, and those that we tell about our learning experience and our teachers. Those are the ones that really last for the rest of our lives. So those two ideas, Julie, stories and teaching, they're as old as we are, as old as the campfire, aren't they? Why are stories such powerful vehicles for teaching and learning, for preserving memories?
well, I love that you're focusing on this, in part because as a longtime radio producer, stories, especially the stories that we tell, are at the heart of the work that I've done for more than 40 years now. And what I've found is that there are so many different kinds of stories. There are the stories that we tell about our own lives, which, when I was a reporter, I would often feel a little uncomfortable asking people, especially having to ask very intimate questions about their own lives. And I talked to people about creativity, so it was really about their creative lives. And what I found was that there's a power not only in listening to a story, but in getting the opportunity to tell your own story.
Mm.
And that's something, I may be jumping ahead, but that's something that we're going to get to in the excerpt that we're going to get to listen to from an upcoming part of Live from Mount Olympus. Everybody here is going to get to hear something that nobody else has heard before. But for me, part of the power of stories is the power of the voice.
Mm.
And I learned this when I was writing my book, which grew out of a radio show that I produced for many years called Studio 360, where we interviewed creative people all over the world. And what I learned very quickly was the intonation in somebody's voice can convey sometimes more than the words themselves. And this, as you say, goes all the way back to the campfire, that it's not just the stories that we tell, but it's the ways that we tell them and the intimate connection we make when we tell them with our own physical voices. And when I was writing the book, I found I had to write several paragraphs to capture the emotional valence of a story that you could get in a split second from the catch in somebody's voice.
Yeah.
So I think that stories are connected, that it's not just the stories that we tell, but it's also our connection to each other's voices.
Yeah. What do you think those essential elements are of a story? What makes that story stick? It's almost like our brains are wired for them, like they're ready for them. What are those
Yeah.
essential elements that we're looking for in a story?
You know, it's funny, as you say that, I think about a dear friend of mine who's a neuroscientist, and is now a dean at NYU. And what she would say is that one of the things that makes our brains actually hold information the most is surprise.
Hmm.
And she once gave a class where she was just giving a regular class about neuroscience, but she had asked one of her students, who was actually he was some sort of a dancer, and she unbeknownst to her students told him to barge in gold booty shorts dancing while she was talking, and then she was surprised, and the whole audience was really surprised, and she said everybody remembered that class because of the surprise. So I think surprise is one of the things that makes stories really sticky. um, for me, the other thing is the sort of really feeling like there's something real and something true,
Hmm.
especially in fictional stories. And for that, I find it's the little details that often when I teach students about writing for the ear, they're like, well, we have to like do big picture. It's like, no, no, it's all the details that allow us in, even if the story is very different from our own. Those details allow us to imagine ourselves into the story. So I think for me, it's those several pieces that come to mind immediately: surprise, and then really putting in details that make something feel vivid and alive.
Yeah. I like the surprise. We're thinking a lot at Inquire Ed about the aha moments that happen in a classroom. And
Yeah.
sometimes those happen after a lot of maybe productive struggle or like every moment isn't an aha moment, but they're building to those moments of like realization, of surprise, of reversal, of a shift. And boy, those are, I'm sure that our teachers out there have seen that moment in their classroom, have experienced that moment themselves, and it can be something that lasts a lifetime. I want to invite everyone in the audience, if you can use the chat, while I ask Julie about her story of a teacher who really impacted her. Can you share maybe a shout out for a teacher that was really impactful in your all lives? Maybe it was why you became a teacher and went into education, or why you became an administrator. So Julie, I'll ask you, who's a teacher? What's a teaching and learning moment that just sticks out for you?
So I feel like I need to say two. I hope that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
First, and you can see her here, is my mom, Janet Burstein, who was a professor of English at Drew University here in New Jersey. And she's the one who instilled my love of Greek myths and my love of storytelling. And so I think I need to mention her first. In fact, the book that she read to me from is right here on my bookshelf. It's the D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths. I don't know whether
Ah,
anybody knows that book from either your own childhood or reading to your kids, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. And the second, as I was listening to those two teachers, I was thinking of Mr. Nolan, who was my freshman high school English teacher. And he always seemed rather distracted to me. And I found that I had to pay a lot of attention. And what he brought to class, a lot of the other kids, I'm not sure it resonated for them the same way it resonated for me, but I remember him reading William Carlos Williams' poem, The Red Wheelbarrow, which just blew my mind. And then he also taught me something that became really important to me throughout the rest of my career, which is don't just turn in your first draft. You need to refrigerate it. And it took me a long time to learn that, but once it sank in, it was like, oh, you mean you get to revise things? Which was it was an astonishing concept to me. And I'm very grateful to him for that.
Oh, that's so great. And our chat is just filling up with teachers. Thanks to Mrs. Cleveland from Lawrence High School in Lawrence, Kansas. She was an English teacher, such a passion for literature. High school French teacher. She let me take 2 years of French independent study. My 12th grade psychology and sociology teacher. Professor Harold Garrett Goodyear. We had one submitted online from Mega that said, I'm a first generation high school college student in my life. Sha'aji was my teacher who came and showed me the value of education. He would always ask me one question, what am I reading these days? It made me realize that I should always be reading something. And now 2 master's degrees later, I have a life in education. So like those stories are just, Mr. Uhlencott helped me through a major transition, moving to a new state, through humor and story. All of these great stories that we have, we internalize them and they shape the course of our lives. That's the great thing, is that a story is something maybe that you hear, and then a story is something that just becomes a part of you. It sort of weaves together. Maybe we'll talk about weaving a little bit later. Before I bring on, we get to Live from Mount Olympus, your collaboration with the Onassis Foundation, I do want to ask a question. It just seems to, Julie, that it's almost like we are inundated with stories nowadays. I mean, like every new series, every new movie, but every commercial is trying to tell us a little story and get in our brains. Our feeds are called stories. There's always an obsession with like the next new story. What's the next new story? What is the value of coming back to a story, to revisiting a story that you already know or already have heard, that is a family story, that is a story of your culture, that is a story of someone else's culture, rather than just the next new thing? What's the value of revisiting stories?
What a great question. And as you ask it, I think again of my mom, who went back to college when I was a little kid to get her master's and her PhD. And what she focused her dissertation on was the ways that the Victorians, the Victorian novelists, used Greek myths in their novels. Novels like Middlemarch by George Eliot. And one of the things, my mom was she died a year and a half ago, but she was a big advisor for me for this project. And one of the things she often said was that each generation gets to tell these stories for themselves. And that the myths, which is what we focus on Live from Mount Olympus, are such powerful stories told originally by people trying to figure out the world that they lived in and their own place within it. And so these were the stories that they told themselves to try to understand why there were seasons. You know, we're going to have an actor who played Demeter, who is the goddess of the harvest. And that story of Demeter and Persephone was really the way that they began to understand, why do the seasons change? What's so powerful about these ancient stories is they still resonate with us today. And we can read the way that they were told in ancient times, the way that people told them in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and now we get to tell them ourselves for our own time. and find our own meaning in them. And so I think that the power of revisiting stories is when we retell them in ways that resonate with us right now.
Yeah.
But when we go back to them, we can see who we were when we first read them, and then understand more about who we are now with all the life that we've lived since the first time we encountered them.
You bring a different self to the story.
Yes.
So let me share live from Mount Olympus. Here for listeners of all ages, live from Mount Olympus weaves the timeless Greek myths with the artistry of the foremost contemporary theater makers and the imaginative power of audio. Hermes, god of storytellers, travelers, and thieves, hosted by Tony Award winner Andre DeShields. So this is quite an experience that you have undertaken. And before you bring on the actors and introduce them, what was the genius of this? What was the birth of this? How did it come about?
So the Onassis Foundation asked me to work with them to develop a podcast. We had no idea what it would be. And with them, we explored several ideas. And one grew up because I was on a march with a dear friend who I had worked with at WNYC, who's now a 7th grade English teacher at a charter school in Newark, New Jersey, Cheryl Rogers. And as we were marching, Cheryl said, you know, if I could do this, I would want you to do something about Greek myths, because my students always ask me, Ms. Rogers, when are we going to get to the Greek myths? And I have to say to them, probably never, because it's not on the PARCC test, which is New Jersey's standardized tests. And she said, I see the incredible thirst that these kids have for these stories. Many of them are Percy Jackson fans, which if any of you are teaching in that age group, you know that that's a big series for them. And she said, for my students in Newark, New Jersey, knowing these Greek myths, which are the foundational stories for so much of Western literature, would be such a gift for them to be able to really connect with those stories and understand them in a new way. And so I brought that to the Onassis Foundation. We developed a pilot and they said, let's go. And of course, it was 2019 when we got started. It was 2020 when we actually were getting ready to record, and everything shut down. And one of the key things that I struggled with was, how do we create a cohesive ensemble over this medium that we're all on right now? And Karen Brooks Hopkins, who is our visionary executive producer, said, you know, I know this theater group, The Team, and none of their actors can work right now. Let's see, maybe they would want to play with us. And we reached out to Rachel Chafkin, who's the artistic director, and Ali Lalonde, who was the producing director then. Emma Orm is the producing director now. And we started talking, and we recorded the whole first 2 seasons over Zoom with all of our actors on their phones.
Oh my gosh.
Recording onto their phones, sending it all to us. And then my production team was all over, and we put it all together that way. And it was really challenging and incredibly magical to be able, when everyone was in their own apartments, bring us all together. And working with the team, with actors like the ones I'm going to introduce in a moment, meant that we didn't have to spend hours and hours creating an ensemble. They already were an ensemble.
Yes.
So it was an extraordinary gift to be able to create with them. And so
Thank you for bringing
the,
this gift to our audience today. Like, I feel like it's in Teacher Appreciation Week. I also want to say that we have a gift that people can actually get at the end of this, a little bit of a, they could get one of the posters from,
Yeah, this one right here.
yeah, that one right there, the season 4, right? Season 4
Right,
posters.
Prometheus.
So, can we meet these fabulous actors?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Libby and Nedra, why don't you open up your cameras? We've got Libby King, who is our Athena. She has been Athena since the very beginning, and she's also played some other roles. In fact, Libby is a very accomplished theater artist, actor, writer, performer. She's part of our fabulous producing partners, the team. She's also a mom, and her son was her teacher when she created the monster Campy for this season for Prometheus in Live from Mount Olympus. We're not going to get to hear that, but you can listen in episode 3. Go and listen to Libby's star turn as Campy, who has quite a extended death scene.
And we'll share those links
Yeah,
to the podcast on Apple and Spotify here at the
great.
end, so that everybody should check it out.
And Libby is also a teacher. She's taught at NYU, at the New School, at Pace, at Sarah Lawrence, LSU, Vanderbilt, and the University of Washington. So Libby is not just a performer, but also teaches other performers. And that is true of our other performer here too, Nedra Marie Taylor, who has created several roles for us, including Demeter. When we told the story of Demeter and Persephone, we really wanted to tell it the way the ancients did, which was not just Persephone's story. Actually, the ancients didn't really tell Persephone's story. They told Demeter's story of this fierce mother who basically stopped the world to get her daughter back. Nedra, that ferocity came through, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful performance. And Nedra, you may recognize her from TV shows such as Orange is the New Black, and she's a series regular on Apple TV's Invasion. And she's also performed on Broadway, and she teaches acting at Pace University. And I am just so excited to have the two of you here with me today, to join you, Martin, in our chance to talk about Live from Mount Olympus. And we've brought an excerpt. And this is an excerpt from our upcoming season. This is going to be released in September. So everybody has to be quiet about this because we haven't shared that this is our next season. But Hermes does tease it a little bit at the end of Prometheus when he says, "And when we gather again, we're going to open up a whole new box." And that is, we're telling the story of Pandora.
Libby and Nedra, I wonder what interested you about digging into these stories that are so old and that have been told so many times. What was something that sort of hooked you into the project that got you really excited?
For me, I'll say that they were stories that I'd always heard the tale of, but didn't ever think I would ever have the opportunity to embody. And that was really exciting to me, asking myself, how does a human being play a god or a goddess in a grounded way? And so that was really appealing. And also, these were gods and goddesses who I'd only ever known in sort of an academic way, and not necessarily felt emotionally or intellectually connected to their stories. And now I do, thanks to this series.
I would add similarly that I feel like I am just getting it all fresh and new. And what's really been beautiful and what Julie shared is that I've kind of shared this journey with my son. He's been very invested in helping me with my scenes before I go into record, because he's got already just such a taste for it. So I feel like I'm experiencing them like a little bit like I feel like it's just with new or fresher eyes. So it's all been hitting me much deeper than I anticipated or expected.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that one of our librarians or one of the people that works in our content department at Inquire Ed came upon the podcast, listens to it with her children, and thought it would be just excerpts of it, episodes of it would be great in our world history curriculum that we have, as because it tells so much also about the time period where these stories first surfaced. Julie, you pointed out that a story that contains what, from a modern point of view, would be misogyny, also was rooted in a time where there were female goddess groups, like worship that was going on, and those tribes were being taken over by other groups. So there's like this rich history about the interactions of the people at the time. That's part of this too, Julie, right?
Yes, and that's something with Pandora we really looked into, because one of the things I hadn't known was that the story of Pandora is actually on the pediment of the statue of Athena in the Acropolis. And so this story that we think, oh, we know it, she's insatiable curiosity, and she opened something she was told not to. And so basically, humanity is doomed now to have all these evils. On the pediment of Athena's sculpture, it's told in a really different way, in that Pandora is really connected back to the more ancient goddesses like Gaia, earth goddesses. She's made of earth. And so this story, when Hesiod, who's the writer who told it Hesiod, I don't think liked people in general, but he really didn't like women. And so he tells it in a very misogynistic way. In fact, at the end, he's like, and this is why a man's life is terrible, whether he marries because his wife may be awful, or he doesn't get married and then he has no one to care for him. That's actually at the end of his one of his tellings of Pandora. But he was writing at a time where the ancient female goddess worship was being buried by a more patriarchal religion. And so it's really been interesting to play with that. And one of the things, it's interesting, I look at our comments on iTunes, and one was looked like probably a young person who was like, they're just not, they don't get it right. They don't tell the truth. This one didn't know that one. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. How do we help people understand that there is no truth here? That these are stories that are told and retold. And it's really, and we talk about this in Pandora, it's really who's telling the tale. That you need to think about who is telling this tale to understand what it is they might be trying to say that might have nothing to do with the story that they're telling.
Yeah, we think a lot about that in inquiry-based social studies instruction, like making sure that students can question the source and the motive of the author, and understand their perspective and the limitations of that. That's a really important thing. So maybe we can hear some of is there anything you need to set up about this specific scene itself?
So this scene is going to be in episode 2 of Pandora. Episode 1 tells the story the way most of us have heard it. That Zeus was very angry at Prometheus, and in order to punish men who had just gotten fire, because Zeus only made men, he was going to create what Hesiod calls a beautiful evil, which is a woman, and send this woman down with a jar filled with all the evils in the world. And at the end of our first telling, Athena, Libby, bursts into Hermes' God's Pod studio and says, "Why are you telling it the way that this guy told it? Don't you know? You were there. That wasn't what happened." And so we tell it again. And at the end of the second telling, Athena says to Zeus, "You can't send Pandora down to Earth yet. I need to teach her something." And so this is the scene where Athena, in just a short amount of time, tries to teach Pandora everything she's going to need to know when she gets to Earth and to the men, because she's going to be the mother of us all. Okay, so Libby and Nedra. Libby is Athena and Nedra is Pandora, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
And I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera. And Nedra, I think you are muted, just so, and Libby, you're both muted. So I'm going to turn off my camera so you'll be bigger on the screen. How about that?
Me too.
Shall we begin?
At my loom.
See, what is it for?
For making cloth.
Cloth?
Yes, like the silvery fabric you're wearing. We take separate threads and weave them together, like this.
What are those threads? The ones that go up and down?
That's called the warp. It's where all weaving begins.
Warp. Got it. And the wooden tool in your hand?
The shuttle, which carries the weft through the warp, like this.
Warp and weft. May I try?
It's tricky, but go ahead. Amazing work, Pandora.
Thank you for teaching me.
Weaving is a noble skill. It will serve you well on Earth.
What's Earth?
All the land below Olympus, forests, mountains, and over there, see, the mud men have built little villages out of stone.
What is it that I'm supposed to do down there exactly? With all these big gods at my creation, it feels like I was made for something important.
You were. The mud men were once quite simple, with simple needs and wants, but they received a very dangerous gift which awakened them to both the beauty and the sorrow of the world.
What might that have to do with me?
Until now, mud men have been living in the dark.
Like living in this workshop all the time. It's rather gloomy in here. So many shadows. Though your loom glows as if there's light coming from inside it.
Interesting. You glow too, though perhaps it's the moonlit cloth around you. Anyway, a short while ago, mud men were given fire.
Fire?
Yes, like this flame. Fire brought more light into the world, but along with that light came a new knowledge of darkness, of loss, of death.
Darkness, loss, death. However, can I help?
By sharing your patience, love, and understanding with them, you'll continue to learn and grow as you live with Epimetheus.
Epimetheus?
Yes, Epimetheus will be your husband. Together, you'll build a life, learn about each other, learn to love and be loved.
Love and be loved. What these mudmen look like?
They're kind of rough and hairy, but they should clean up well eventually.
And Epimetheus, is he rough and hairy too?
Epimetheus is rather cute.
Cute?
Appealing to the senses.
Will he find me appealing to the senses?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, his eyes are gonna pop out of his head when he sees you for the first time.
That does not sound like a good thing.
It's a good thing. Trust me.
What else do I need to know?
Too much. But we have no time. Too much. But we have no time. You're bright. I've given you wisdom. You'll learn on your own. Before you go, though, I must tell you about one more thing. The jar.
That big jar leaning against the wall? I love the pattern on it. What a beautiful, deep, burnished black against the red terracotta clay.
Listen carefully, Pandora. You must handle that jar with extreme caution.
So it doesn't break?
The jar contains, well, some will say it contains all the evils in the world.
Evils?
Oh, right. You just got here. How can I explain it? Evils are, well, sometimes they're things that are bad, hard, destructive, awful. But sometimes they're just feelings that are in the wrong place, the wrong time, difficult to contain. That can lead to destruction. And sometimes there are things no one can change, and that makes mudmen sad.
This doesn't sound good. Those evils should stay in there forever.
The complicated thing is, those evils are already in the world, even here on Mount Olympus, even among the gods. And there are other things in that jar, things the mudmen will need to grow, to change, to become full human beings.
I think I'm beginning to understand. But it all sounds so hard. Can't I just leave the evils here?
Zeus will demand that you take the jar with everything inside. Like fire, it will be a curse and also a gift. Because the jar contains words that the mudmen don't yet have. Language that you and Epimetheus and the mudmen will need to talk about your challenges, to take action, to comfort each other, to grieve. Wisdom begins when we are able to call things by their true names.
Everything about this feels like it was part warp and part wet.
I knew you'd be wise. You'll be able to handle all that's required of you. You're Pandora, she who gives all.
Yeah.
I call on the goddesses who have come before me to protect you. Great mothers of us all, Rhea, Metis, Gaia, without whom nothing would exist on earth or in the heavens. I call upon you, glorious goddesses, to grant Pandora the wisdom and compassion to become mother of all humanity.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm ready.
Libby and Nedra, thank you so much. Just hearing the two of you read the script every time, it transports me, and that's really wonderful. And what I always take away from this scene is just that the world is what it is, but we get to make of it stories, which gets back to what you asked about at the beginning, Martin, and that's where that I love, as you're saying, Libby, Athena's nervousness, but also her willingness to say, I'm just going to put it all out there, and it's not all good, but here's what you might be able to do with it. and that this is what we do. This is what you will do as a human. I'm a god, so it's not my thing, but this is what you get to do. And I think about that with Prometheus too, which is what this story grows out of, because Prometheus makes a big decision too in defying Zeus and giving men fire. And Zeus is like, you don't want to do that because fire is going to lead to all sorts of terrible things, which is true. And Prometheus says, that's true, but without it, these creatures can't become fully human. And so it is always that it's complicated.
Libby and Nedra, I asked this question to Julie, and I want to ask both of you before we wrap up here. We've been talking a lot about teachers who impacted our lives, or moments in the classroom that were like aha moments that changed, like a really memorable learning experience. Is there a teacher that you can shout out and thank and tell us a little bit about how they impacted you?
I can go. It's been so beautiful to think about this question a little bit. I was reminded of Dr. Ann Cunard, who was my humanities teacher in junior high. She had the best assignments, but my favorite assignment that really, like, I mean, it was really a huge moment. It was an aha, I think, moment for me. We read The Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and the book is this meditation where the author goes and sits and sort of and just like focuses on a very like specific piece of nature and writes about it over a year seasonally. And so she had us do this over a course of several days, pick a spot that we see how much I could see in just such a like a very small, and to express it and to but anyway, that occurred to me. Thank you, Dr. Cunard.
I love that, Libby. It would hands down be my high school math teacher, Paul Buckley. I went to Elizabeth Seton High School in Bladensburg, Maryland. He just so happened to also be the drama teacher at that school. And I kind of stumbled into the drama club, and he ended up being the first adult in my life who sort of understood my excitement for theater and musicals. And he really did affirm me, and we are still friends to this day, just 3 years later.
I think that the last thing I just want to say is thank you to teachers. I know how hard this job is. I know from watching my mom how much of yourself you put in to the work that you do. And I know also from my mom how sometimes it feels like people don't recognize that and appreciate it. And I do think that being a teacher is one of the most, maybe the most important job there is right now. But I just want to say thanks for being a teacher and for caring about my kids and all the kids who come into your classroom.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Libby, Nedra, and Julie. It was a pleasure to have you.
So much fun. Thank you.
And thank you all the teachers out there. Take care.
Bye.